Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Morena everyone, it's Mikki here and welcome to Mikkipedia. So we are in the rush to Christmas, which makes this a timely episode to bring to you, particularly if you listen closely, you jump on the links in the show notes and you fill out the giveaway form and you're in the draw to win one of 5 double packs of CurraNZ, which is the amazing blackcurrant supplement which is responsible for so many awesome things. Now, those of you who have listened to my show for a while, have gone back through previous podcasts, would have seen that in fact I've spoken to my guest today, Fleur Cushman, about the science behind blackcurrants back in mid-April. So if you haven't caught that interview, I highly recommend that after this one, go back and remind yourself about all of the other health benefits that have been scientifically proven to occur through taking this CurraNZ supplement. However, today on the podcast, Fleur and I have a bit of an update on some new findings and what this might mean for those of us who are active, those of us who have potential skin issues, and just where the science is going and what the new studies are showing with regards to taking New Zealand Blackcurrants. Before we kick this off, I will just remind you that your best way to support the podcast is to subscribe and please leave a review in your favourite podcast app where there is that opportunity too. That just makes it much more visible to other people who are looking in this health and wellness space and want to learn a little bit more about all of the topics that we talk about on Mikkipedia because of the awesome guests that I get the opportunity to speak to. And of course, the second best way to support the podcast is to sign up to my recipe access. So this is $12 a month. You get access to all of my recipes, to my weekly emails, my private Facebook page, and the opportunity to pick my brain to help individualize your already awesome nutrition approach. One last thing I will mention in the lead up to Christmas actually is my Mondays Matter Christmas edition. Right, so if you're listening to this and you feel like you need something to get you through to Christmas, something to focus on when we are surrounded by Christmas treats, schedules that are all over the place, many more social occasions, but you just want a little bit of structure with your food, Mondays Matter Christmas edition is for you. Now this is going on sale on Thursday, so if you are picking this up on Wednesday, just have one more day. It is a 28-day meal plan. It is access to a private Facebook group set up specifically for this, where each day, like an advent calendar, beginning on the 1st of December, I will give something to focus on for that day. Instead of getting a little Cadbury's choc, which of course is pretty delish, I will give you a health wellness activity that, in addition to the Mondays Matter program, Christmas edition, you can engage with and undertake, and it will be so much fun. It'll be a group of us doing it together. These activities aren't like out of this world hard or anything like that, but it's just something fun to sort of engage with as we go about in the lead up to the holiday season. So if anyone follows me on Facebook or on Instagram, you know I'm not about no treats and deprivation or anything like that, but I am about structure in and around food so you feel more confident in those social sort of settings. Part of the plan, of course, given it's Christmas, there will be allowances for things like after work drinks or morning teas or something like that, but it is more an opportunity to feel supported in this time as we lead up to the big old day. So I will put a link to the waitlist in the show notes, and then you'll get an email inviting you to join come Thursday. However, on today's show, as I said, I'm speaking to Fleur Cushman about the updated science in the blackcurrants. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, Fleur is the co-founder of CurraNZ, which is the sister company to Health Currancy Ltd in the UK, and they produce one of the most exciting supplements on the market today, right out of New Zealand. So we have an in-depth discussion on today's show about that updated research and some of those additional performance and recovery benefits that we can experience when we take CurraNZ. And we go through, what the dose might look like, what the timing of taking the supplements are, and all get down to sort of the nitty-gritty, which is awesome. We will have links to CurraNZ and to the competition that we're also running around CurraNZ and your opportunity to win one of 5 double packs of CurraNZ. And it doesn't matter where you live, because this is an international company. We can send them to you all over the world. The question I'm asking for you to respond to is, how long does it take for the blackcurrants to peak in the bloodstream in a sporting context? So I speak to Fleur about this and the best timing for the CurraNZ, and so we have a conversation about that. Have that in your mind as you're going into that interview. Commit it to memory to then be able to fill out that Google form. All right, team, hope you enjoy this conversation that I had with Fleur Cushman from CurraNZ.
Things with flu, if it's flu or a cold.
And what about your sense of taste and smell? Did you lose that?
I didn't. No, I was fine. My other half has, though, and he still hasn't got it back, and it's driving him nuts. So that's,
mate.
Yeah. And it was really weird, because I was just incredibly tired, and I was in bed for 2.5 days, and then I rallied. I was 100%. And I was doing the housework, and everyone else had gone down with it in the house. So I was doing soup runs and cooking, and I was doing gardening and, getting the show back on the road. And then 2 days later, I just went down with it again. Maybe I did too much. And then there was like another 5 days to come right. So, but look, I'm here, because of course it made it a bit nerve-wracking, and it literally came down to the wire as to whether or not I'll be able to travel.
I was wondering that. So did you have to produce a negative test before?
I did. And of course, you're more likely to return a positive result for 3 months after you've had COVID. So you can imagine my absolute delight when I got the negative result back. But I had to get a medical certificate from doctors as well to say I'd recovered. And look, I'd been double jabbed as well.
Yep.
So, and my other half has been double jabbed. So it is absolutely by no means an exemption from getting COVID, but they say that it stops you experiencing severe symptoms, and that's certainly the case for me. My other half, Dave, is worse with it, but then he's 5 months since he's had his second jab, so it might be waning.
That's a good call, actually.
Because I had my second jab 2 weeks before we caught.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Barry, being in the hospital system, was one of the first probably to get vaccinated.
Okay.
And it's been about 7 months since his second jab now. So from a booster perspective, he'll be looking for, that's something that they're going to have to sort of roll out. But New Zealand's been particularly, I don't know, slow. Who knows, actually, Fleur? I say that because other people have said we've been slow, so I'm like, we must be slow because everyone else is saying we're slow. I don't know that we're slow or not. But it's the whole thing is just interesting.
Yeah, I think, look, we've been living in the eye of the COVID storm for 1.5 years, and I think, we've lost, 140,000 people have died in the UK from it. So not many people are untouched by it. People have had a lot of personal tragedy from losing their loved ones. And, last Christmas, they actually brought forward the lockdown and were telling people don't visit your parents and grandparents because we want them around next Christmas. And a lot of people didn't. And by the end of January, we were hearing about, grandparents, both sets of grandparents passing away because they picked it up at Christmas, just from visiting. And that's a really big lesson. So I think we've been really obedient, we've been really compliant, we've understood the importance that vaccination is likely our way out of this and to protecting our health. And sure, we're going to get it. Everyone's going to get it at some point. It's going to go through New Zealand. It's hard to see how it's not going to be transmitted through New Zealand. So, and the stats are compelling. In the UK, the hospitalisations are pretty much down to people who haven't been vaccinated or they were due for another booster. And, we're seeing an increase in the older and the first set of people who received it.
Yeah.
We're seeing an increase in those hospitalisations now.
Fleur, I think isn't that it, right? In New Zealand, we've been so protected from COVID and the consequences of it. And now, for the most part, still now, even though we're having numbers up into the late 100s in terms of people getting COVID, very few deaths, although we're beginning to hear, I think, more, I say more now, like I'm seeing in the news a couple of people die. I think maybe 4 people have died in the last 3 weeks or something, and actually that's quite a bit. And we're actually hoping, I think a lot of us here in Auckland are hoping for COVID just to run down the country, basically, not only because then that will hopefully encourage people to do what they need to do in order to keep themselves safe, i.e. get vaccinated, but also then that changes how we move around the country and what we're able and not able to do, eh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, you've hit the nail on the head, Mikki. And I think that's the difficulty, is that a lot of people don't really give it the seriousness that it's due. They think, look, I'm young, I'm fit, I'm healthy, I've got no health problems, I've got good immunity, I'm going to be fine. And they're the ones who've been really caught out in the UK.
Yeah.
We read lots of stories about people going, I didn't get the vaccination because I honestly didn't feel I would need it. It's a flu.
Yeah.
And then they're the ones who are really hammered by the breathing difficulties and find themselves in hospital and, in real trouble. So, we're just fortunate that, kids aren't affected to the same degree that adults are. So we haven't seen children dying, because that would have added a whole nother layer of heartache into, the
definitely.
picture. Yeah.
So, Fleur, where are you right now?
So I'm in the Distinction Hotel in Christchurch, overlooking a very sad-looking Christchurch cathedral that is being restored, which is nice. So it's nice to see the work taking place every day, and those guys are out there every morning, starting at 8, hammering away. So so I'm down here. But I finish my isolation on Sunday, and there's a charter flight back to Auckland. So I get to see the family then, which is good.
Oh, that is great. And did you have to go to Christchurch, or was that the only spot that was available?
I did.
Oh, sorry, did you? Okay, sorry. What I meant to say is, are you in Christchurch because that was the only spot available?
Yeah. So basically, all the arriving Kiwis on the flight, we were all herded into a transit lounge and onto that flight down here. So all of our flight is still here. So which is quite interesting. But I've done really well. I've got a really cracking hotel, and the level of care that I've received, the daily phone calls, the welfare checks, the level of accommodation is just, I can't complain, Mikki. Honestly, it's been great. There's no housework, there's no shopping, there's no cooking, there's that dishwasher which always needs packing and unpacking. There's been no distractions. I've been able just to work and get over my jet lag, and the room service, to the degree it's like I've been having to up my HIIT sessions in the room, because being confined and having really constant food, I'm like, right, cancel lunches because you're overfeeding me. I need to do more exercise. I'll be on short rations when I get out of here. So.
Hilarious. You just probably need to up your dose of currants.
I know. Take it 3 times a day.
Yeah, exactly. So, Fleur, great to chat to you again. It's been, you came on the podcast, or we published the podcast in April, but I believe it was actually, a couple of months prior to that, that we actually had that initial conversation on currants, and I got such amazing feedback from so many people who listened to the podcast to then go out and purchase it. And particularly, I hear a lot from people in that allergy space and asthma space that they've, their kids really notice a difference. So I'm really stoked to be able to chat to you again about some recent research updates in particularly sports performance is certainly the area that we're going to dive into, but of course other areas as well, which you also mentioned we have some new understanding and stuff about currents and the mechanisms with how it works. So any of us who are interested in this stuff will be super stoked to be able to just get a bit of that brief update.
Yeah, perfect. Well, we've got some really nice research updates to report, Mikki. So, look, thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share the information because it is important and it is exciting. And it's relevant to whether or not you're someone who wants to, embrace a more active lifestyle and get healthier, or whether or not, you're an athlete, a recreational athlete or an elite athlete. So we'll start with the exercise recovery study.
Yes.
Because this is kind of a really landmark piece of research for us and for blackcurrants, really. And look, just to set the scene, as you'll know, Mikki, that in recent years, food supplements containing polyphenol compounds called anthocyanins have become really popular for aiding post-exercise recovery. And common examples of these are tart cherries, blueberries, and pomegranate. But actually, blackcurrants have one of the highest anthocyanin densities of any fruit. They have twice that of blueberries and 6 times more than cherries. So they're really at the top of the pecking order in terms of their, polyphenolic density. And unlike blueberries and cherries, New Zealand blackcurrants actually have a health claim for aiding exercise recovery, which is a really big deal. And that's been performed by scientists in New Zealand. And they've found that blackcurrants reduce oxidative stress, which is heavily implicated in exercise recovery. So our study, which was performed in the UK at the University of Surrey, is the first of its kind to give us measurements of improvements to muscle pain and soreness, and the degree that it accelerates your functional recovery after exercise. And the nice thing is that this was actually performed on one capsule of currants. And we found that it halved muscle soreness at 24 and 48 hours compared to placebo. It provided 3 times faster recovery of muscle function. So to explain that a bit more, the blackcurrant group regained their muscle strength within 24 hours versus 72 hours in the placebo group, which is a really, really dramatic finding. And finally, they also found that blackcurrant led to 84% less muscle tissue damage after that damaging bout of exercise. So that's another really nice finding. So just to explain what they did in the study, they tested 27 men and women who were unaccustomed to exercise. So it involves strength training, which builds muscle, in an isolated limb model. So to put it another way, they essentially performed a bicep curl under force on a device designed to magnify muscle damage and the inflammation response. So it's one of the gold standard means of inducing damage and showing whether a dietary intervention will be effective for facilitating recovery.
And that's certainly something which I found really interesting, was one that the study used measures that weren't just self-report with regards to recovery. The study actually used measures looking at the actual tissue to see what markers of inflammation and damage are there. And I think that's such a strength of this particular, I suppose, the study design. And then also with regards to how they measure that, how they do the resistance-based training, as you said, the isolated limb exercise, because often people are like, oh, well, what does that even tell us about, how strong they got? Or that's not a real weights-based training study, but that's sort of how you have to do it in research, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it needs to be a really tightly controlled model. And that's the thing about, this particular study design, is that they could control the factors. They knew that they were, eliciting a lot of damage to that muscle. And I know that, one of the comments from the researchers was actually the non-blackcurrant participants had to be monitored for quite a few weeks after, because it delivered such a degree of damage and they didn't recover. Within, they monitored their progress in the study for 4 days, but actually a lot of them hadn't recovered after 1 week, 2 weeks. So it was a really full-on damaging bout of exercise, just to put that into context. And they chose for this, Mikki, non-resistance trained individuals. And there was a reason for that, because people who are unaccustomed to exercise and who are involved in strength training, they're the group that's more likely to suffer the most from delayed onset muscle soreness after a heavy session. And it's those people who will be put off by the muscle pain and the discomfort and the length of time it takes them to get back to themselves. And so they're less likely to go to the gym. And of course that interferes with adherence to new training regimes. And of course you need to do it regularly to get the health and training adaptations. So using the study design makes it really apparent that it will be an important finding if the said nutritional intervention can aid and facilitate recovery, because it will help encourage people to get back to, exercise at a sufficient frequency to get the important health improvements and training adaptations.
And the habit too.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Like part of starting anything, and for a lot of us, particularly this time of year, right? So this will, we're coming into the new year. This is when people make decisions around their health and sort of commit to something. It's very hard to commit to a training regime if you are now spending like 3 to 4 days actually recovering from it. So if this has the potential to improve that recovery, then you get to be more consistent with that training regime.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you just, you can achieve your health and fitness goals faster. And you enjoy it more, Mikki. No one wants to be coming down the stairs on their bum because their muscles are screaming. You know what it's like. It's just the normal act of going about your life is severely affected by muscle soreness, and it's just not nice.
Yeah, totally. Hey, Fleur, can I ask you, it were males and females in the study, wasn't there?
Yes, there were.
Yeah.
So there were 27 in total.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and just I think it's probably worth just understanding a little bit more about how blackcurrant helped and about the process of muscle recovery, because it involves 2 phases of recovery, and it's quite straightforward. Firstly, you exercise and that causes disruption and tearing and stretching to your muscle fibers. And then the secondary stage is a rise in inflammation, swelling, and oxidative stress. And it's these secondary events that lead to additional tissue damage and the release of toxic byproducts, which result in impaired muscle function and the pain you suffer. And so that's why we call it delayed muscle onset soreness, because it can last several days, and it normally kicks in 24 to 48 hours afterwards. And so the rationale is that the blackcurrant anthocyanins, which are the kind of naturally occurring purple phytochemicals that give berries their colouring, they're antioxidants, they're natural anti-inflammatory compounds, and they increase blood flow. So the scientists believe that blackcurrants prime the cell for exercise, and they help the body cope with the inevitable rise in inflammation and cellular stress that you get from strenuous activity. And so what they found is that supplementing on currants, 1 capsule a day for 8 days before and 4 days following that test, help the muscle tissue cope with that inevitable increase in oxidative stress and inflammation, and it reduced the secondary stages that create that added tissue damage and leads to the pain responses. So as we all know, it's not uncommon for, recovery after a hard session to take several days. And in the study, blackcurrant delivered a stark contrast in functional recovery. And that's a quote from the lead scientist in the study, and it reduced the pain by half in the blackcurrant participants. So I think the take-home message here, there's a few implications, but the take-home message here is that blackcurrant anthocyanins will help anyone who's unaccustomed to doing strenuous exercise, or help them to train more regularly and reduce soreness and improve their muscle recovery. And that's, what we touched on earlier. And so that's, there's a health message there as well, which is really important. But I'm expecting you're going to say, well, what happens, what about trained athletes? And look, we have a lot of, really fit people using it. We've got elite athletes using currants. And, there was a study performed actually a few years ago. It was before the Rio Olympics, and I can't say huge amounts about it, but it was performed by some of Britain's leading researchers on elite pentathletes. And they found really similar outcomes in this applied study on pentathletes who were undergoing really high training loads in the lead up to some world championships. And they found again that, these athletes experienced reduced inflammation and oxidative stress, which are similar outcomes to what we've seen in this later study on untrained individuals.
And it's interesting, Fleur, because this sort of builds on the rowing study that we chatted about last time with that improved neutrophil function,
Right.
just with the improved immune markers post a hard sort of rowing sort of bout or high intensity bout using the rowing machine. And so you've got a few different mechanisms with which now we know blackcurrants can help improve recovery, improve resilience, and help an athlete be more resilient. And yes, this study is in untrained individuals, but the one that you just described with the Rio athletes, that's just a good example of it sort of working across the basis of athleticism, and you don't often see that actually. So, and I know that you'll know this, Fleur, obviously, because you're steeped in the research around it, and others may be aware of it, but there are, certain supplements, and beets comes to mind, and that dietary nitrates and stuff, and it's it's super interesting how in an untrained individual you could potentially get this improved blood flow, vasodilation through that production of nitric oxide, which you may not see in an athlete who is well trained. And they've tried to explain it in a couple of different ways, and one of the suggestions was that an elite athlete will have a better diet. Anyone that works with elite athletes will probably know that that's not a truism actually. Like an elite athlete will perform sort of almost despite their diet in some ways, but also not everyone is going to be a responder to the supplement either, which is I do want to ask you about, but this is an exciting sort of thing for me because you feel quite, as a practitioner, quite confident that recommending a product like Curran's, regardless of that degree of experience, is probably going to have a beneficial outcome, sort of regardless of who you suggest takes it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we've seen it works, and unusually, you touched on it with that beetroot and dietary nitrates isn't as effective in elite athletes compared to untrained. And in our program of studies, we have actually seen that it does have an effect on trained individuals. And, it's unusual because trained people have really highly conditioned systems, as you know, Mikki. And so it's more difficult in a research setting to achieve physiological improvements because of the degree of adaptation and efficiencies already present in those people. So one study springs to mind in this, and it was an exhaustive running test using elite footballers and recreational footballers. And we saw that actually blackcurrant was incredibly effective in the elite group for reducing fatigue. So, it was really interesting that it was really effective in helping reduce the slowing of their sprint times in the elite footballers, and it was more effective than the recreationals, which was a really interesting finding. And we do actually have a few kind of theories on that. Look, firstly, we always see non-responders in our studies. There are always people who respond in a very different way and to a different degree. And some people just don't respond, and some people respond incredibly well. But our present thinking is that gut health might play a role in it. So if you've got a really healthy gut, the absorption of the anthocyanins in the blackcurrant will be enhanced. And so you'll just, get better absorption and a better outcome. The other thing is dosing might be a factor. Some people might just need more or to take it longer. And it could also be down to pure genetics as well. So it's actually an area that we're looking into further at the moment because we're really interested to know why some people respond well and some people don't. So hopefully we will have a few more answers for you in due course on that one.
Fleur, you mentioned that they dosed for 8 days in the lead up to the exercise bout and then 4 days sort of post. Was there anything about the length of time prior that was important in the response to the training and to the blackcurrants? Like, what's the rationale there? Do you know?
Yeah, it's a good question, because actually, if you take blackcurrant just, 20 minutes before you train on the day and you haven't taken it, it will work, and it will work pretty well. So it was interesting to see that if you take it 8 days before, that it had this effect, because what we're seeing more and more in our research is that we think we need a build up of the blackcurrant metabolites in the system before you get the full-blown benefits. And certainly the New Zealand research program has shown that, yep, it works with one dose, but actually the benefits are really getting going and far more pronounced after 5 weeks. So, we've our present thinking is that 1 week is a good period to start seeing those changes take effect, particularly for reducing oxidative stress, for increasing blood flow, and all the kind of cardiometabolic effects that blackcurrant has. So, look, we dosed with this rationale too, because we wanted to see if it was going to have an effect. What's a minimum amount of time that people can expect to see, a good improvement, and a week is about where we're at with the product, which is actually quite fast acting. We were really pleased to see that result, and particularly because it was only on 1 capsule of Currans as well, Mikki. Our dosing work has kind of led us to see that actually you get, and particularly in performance, the cardiovascular and the fat burning improvements are more pronounced with that 2 capsule dose. You still get them at 1, but they're better at 2. So it's really good to see this really, really fantastic outcome at just one capsule. And we didn't control or measure the individuals based on their BMI. So we do know there is a bit of a formula for recovery, and the heavier you are, there is a dose-dependent relationship, so it is more beneficial to take a higher dose. But actually, we didn't do that in the study, so that was actually pretty interesting for us.
Yeah, that is interesting, Fleur. So, I take Currans ever since, before we had our initial conversation, actually, but I have been very diligent, and it's now habitual for me to take my Currans every morning. I take 2. I take it for the performance benefits, actually, and the general sort of health outcomes. Should I probably just be taking 1?
Well, you can drop it down. I think that the thing is, you need to get it into your system first, and then you need to do it every day. It's kind of like any healthy habit. I think it's absolutely fine if you're on days you're not training, or you're not training very hard, just take 1. You can load it around the intensity of your training. So if you're going to have a really hard session, you take 2, because you will arguably get a better outcome if you're doing, a big block of intensive training and you're expecting to hurt as a result. So you can play around with dosing, Mikki, and look, everyone responds in a different way. So it is a little bit of trial and error to see what works best for you. And for example, some people, like we recommend, take it 2 hours before you train. In this recovery study, they actually did it an hour before people trained. And some people just find that actually an hour is their sweet spot, and other people, and I guess if you're taking it with food as well, slightly longer is better. But what you want to do is make sure that you're having your exercise relatively soon after you have the product, because you want to be making sure you've got the peak of those blackcurrant bioactives in your system, because they do kind of metabolize out of your body within about 8 hours.
Fleur, you mentioned that there may be a particular benefit to timing your intake of Currans either an hour before or 2 hours before to get those peak anthocyanins in the blood. What recommendation is there for athletes who go on extended missions? Like, so I'm going out for an 8-hour run. I have an ultra marathon, which I'm doing in January, which will be 7.5 hours. I've got multiple sort of Ironman athletes that take the blackcurrants. What's your recommendation for these people?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Mikki, because we see that after you take it and it is absorbed into your bloodstream, all the anthocyanin levels are peaking, but then they slowly drop away over about an 8-hour period. So what we say to those individuals who are racing for really long periods of time is to retake it mid-race and top up again, because it's always end of the race when fatigue is really starting to become a limiting factor. And so anything you can do to help your blood flow and your fat oxidation and just reduce those fatigue factors is going to be really good for you. So what we say is, of course, if you take it before the race, 1 to 2 hours, brilliant. And then, for example, if you're doing Ironman triathlon, we say take 2 or 3 capsules. You cut it out of the blister because it comes in a blister pack, and you can cut the capsules out, take them to your handlebars, and you take them on the bike. So about 4 or 5 hours into that race, definitely around that mark, you need to be redosing, and then you'll get the added benefit of topping up those levels and just helping for the business end of the race.
That's awesome. And of course, blood flow is such an important part of this, and vasodilation. Is there any research looking at the benefit of anthocyanins in heat?
Yeah, so we've done some heat performance studies actually, and we have found that, so what normally happens, Mikki, is that when you're exercising in the heat, your ability to burn fat and use fat as fuel reduces, because it's a more stressful environment on the body, and the body becomes less efficient as using fat as fuel. So you use more carbohydrate, which leads to experiencing more fatigue, and it's just exertion is harder in the heat, and it is a real problem for a lot of athletes. They just don't perform to the same degree. So what we found with the blackcurrant, which we've seen in about 6 studies, it increases your body's ability to burn fat. It favors fat as fuel for athletes and for recreational athletes. And if taken with the heat, it actually sends your fat burning levels back to a normal range. So it just helps, it helps people perform in the heat. But a really neat finding is that anyone who's trying to train in hot conditions are more prone to exertional heat stress. So it can lead to heat sickness, and it increases inflammation, which is released through the gut. And I think we all see, was it Johnny Brownlee at the World Champs in Mexico a few years ago, and he was coming into the finish line and the heat stress got to him. And, that's the impact that we see on hot conditions in athletes, But what we found in the study is that actually blackcurrant was very good at preventing heat stress, because the anti-inflammatory properties of the product were helping to maintain that gut barrier integrity, and that reduce the impact of symptoms on athletes. So yeah, for anyone who is kind of racing and competing in hot conditions, there's kind of 2 nice little benefits there to use the blackcurrant for.
That's awesome, Fleur, because I take it about 45, like it's not exact, but I get up and I have my currans with my Mitre Q, and I have it with my coffee, and I might have a snack. Probably about 70% of the time I'll have something to eat, not a lot, but just something, and then I typically train within the next hour. So
Perfect.
On hearing that, in my head I'm like, okay, so for my longer or harder runs, which might be 2 to 3 times a week, I'll now start just on the 2, continue with the 2, but maybe I will drop it back to 1 and just see what difference I find. That will be super interesting, because what I have certainly noticed, and I would have said this in our other conversation as well, is that my recovery is so much better since taking the currants. Like it is, like I definitely notice it, which is one of the things why I get really excited by it, because I'm pretty impervious to most supplements, actually, Fleur.
Oh, that's interesting, Mikki. Yeah.
I don't notice them. If I take a B, I don't notice like a real shift in my energy levels. I don't notice I take magnesium, but more because I think I know in my head that I need it, not because I get this super duper benefit from it. And it took me a while to recognize the impact that currants had. And then I sort of clicked on and clued onto it that actually I'm training a lot better now and I'm feeling a lot better in my training compared to what I was feeling. And I was chatting to someone else, Matt Carpenter, who is a researcher in the UK, and we were talking about keto and low carb diets.
Okay.
And this is a bit of a tangent, but sort of related to the potential benefit or the recognition of benefit. And he said that some of the people he talked to about a low carb approach didn't notice a benefit until they realized that they could go out and train and looked back at their month and went, oh, that's 400 kilometres more this month than last month, but I felt the same. And I thought about how I feel about black currants in relation to that. I didn't really think about it until I actually looked at what I was doing.
No, that's it. And I think, sometimes you need to take it and then you come off it and then you go, oh, yeah, it works, because, I've noticed a difference in my energy and my recovery. I'm more sore, or maybe your training sessions, the quality of your training sessions drop. And I think if you're doing a lot of training, there is the big conversation around actually you need to stay healthy, and, intense exercise does reduce your immune defenses. I know we touched on that earlier, and what we've seen in the research is that it does help keep your immunity high. So if you can keep the big blocks of training in and know that it'll help you stay healthy, that's incredibly important, because, no one wants to get sick when we're training for a goal, because it's so disruptive. A successful athlete has to stay healthy.
For sure.
And I think, immunity is really implicated in recovery. And I know our premiership footballers in the UK that we supply, they have really intense kind of competition schedules. They can be in matches 2 or 3 times a week, particularly at the end of the season. And I know the feedback from those clubs is that they find the product so good for recovery, and particularly, maybe older players who are struggling more with their recovery. And it just helps prevent overtraining and just helps them get through the business end of really busy seasons, which is pretty, good to see it being used at that level and being used effectively.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned sort of at the outset before you began to describe the study that this study actually helps support a health claim in New Zealand. Can you briefly describe why that's important and what it means?
Yeah, for sure. So health claims are very difficult to achieve because of the level of evaluation and research and data and proof that you need that a natural product can have the benefit that you're trying to prove. And it was something that was actually undertaken by the New Zealand government, because they recognised that black currants in New Zealand actually have a very high nutritional value and represent a lot of potential for the New Zealand agricultural industry and developing an industry. And it took 10 years of research for the scientists to develop the science and publish and prove to the health authorities that there is a compelling case for New Zealand blackcurrants for reducing oxidative stress, which, as we've discussed, is heavily implicated in recovery. And they proved it, and they showed that blackcurrants are very effective for improving exercise recovery through their antioxidant and anti-inflammatory mechanisms. And so blackcurrants are actually one of the very few natural health products in New Zealand to have a health claim. And it's a real, Kiwi should be really proud of this, because it takes a huge amount of investment and commitment from scientists to achieve the level of evaluation that they need to get a health claim over the line.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Fleur, can you remind us, so the dose in a currant is about 300 milligrams. What would that be equivalent to if we were just to eat black currants? And I'm not suggesting we don't eat black currants, because of course any level of anthocyanins in the diet is also amazing.
Yep.
But what would that equate to?
So that would be the equivalent of a large handful of fresh or frozen black currants.
Okay.
Yeah. So you do need to have a minimum level to kind of get the functional benefits we see, but even, if you're just including them every day in your diet, it's a healthy habit to get into. But what we've done, we've standardized the dose, because we've seen in the research that dosing is important to get a benefit. And it just means that people know every single day that they're getting that dose that delivers the outcome that we see in the research, and they don't have to guess at it. And I think New Zealanders are really lucky, because they have fresh and frozen blackcurrant options as well. There are New Zealand blackcurrant products on the market here for consumers, but actually in the Northern Hemisphere, that's not the case, because 90% of the British blackcurrant crop gets sold to Ribena, and you just never see fresh or frozen blackcurrant formats in supermarkets, and they're really hard to source and they're scarce. So we're pretty proud of our extract, and it means that, people can source it year round, they can travel with it. And blackcurrants are also quite tart. So it means that you don't, there's not the kind of, some people experience like a taste challenge with it because it is quite tart. But at least with the capsule, you can kind of circumvent all of that and just,
one and done.
One and done. I like it.
Yeah. So, Fleur, this is there was another study actually which I found, which I would love to chat to you about if that's all right. And it's about the presence of bacteria on our skin and the potential benefits of blackcurrants in helping reduce it. Are you able to describe in a little bit more detail about that study and what was found? And this is obviously beyond the athletic study, but I've just found it super interesting.
Yeah, this is a really novel study. It measured what they call 2 non-enol gas emissions. So these emissions occur as a result of the breakdown of fats and glands under the skin. And as we age, cells in our body and in these glands come under attack in the process which we referred to earlier called oxidative stress. And we get increasing amounts of oxidative stress as we age. It's a process that naturally accelerates, and it results in the emission of skin odours. And these skin odours are commonly referred to as old person smell. So, it is a bit of a giggle, the study, but actually the rationale behind it is really sound, and it was performed by Professor Mark Willems of the University of Chichester, who's also performed most of the exercise performance research as well. But he has a real interest in the health impact as well, and so he did the study. And the thing about 2 non-enol gas is that it isn't produced by 20-year-olds, and you only start producing it from about 40 years old and beyond, and it's linked to body odour. So what they did is they gave the participants, who I think were aged, between 45 or 40 and 70, and they gave them blackcurrant for a week, every day for a week, and then they tested them, and then they captured these emissions of 2 non-enol from the skin, and they found that on average it reduced emissions by 28%, but almost half of the participants had reductions in the range of 70%, and there were 2 people who had improvements of 80 and 82%, which is actually quite amazing. So,
yes.
so it's a quirky little study, but it's quite a neat study, and it's just another interesting application for blackcurrant as we age.
Yeah, for sure. And again, the mechanism isn't different, right? Because it's reducing oxidative stress, but it's just showing how currants are potentially beneficial in a whole host of our sort of physiology. What I thought of when I read the study, and also as you were explaining it, Fleur, was I wonder what impact this would have on the odour of when you walk into a retirement home.
This is it.
And and you get that, dare I say it, old person smell. I wonder what impact that would have on that.
It would be quite an interesting exercise to run, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it really would.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where the application for blackcurrant certainly lies.
Fleur, you mentioned that Mark Willems, in fact, has been recently recognised for his research. Is that right?
Yeah, he has. Mark started the New Zealand Blackcurrant Research Program in around 2012 and published the first study around 2014, 2015. And since then, he's published, I think he's up to 29 studies on New Zealand blackcurrant, and he's become a really in-demand international speaker on the subject. So it's really brilliant news that Mark was recently invited to present his New Zealand Blackcurrant exercise performance and health research at the World Polyphenol Congress, which was held in Malta in September. And he received the Best Scientific Award of Polyphenol Applications in 2021, which is a really, a well-deserved accolade. These awards are not easy to win. And, to put it into New Zealand terms, his British program of research has put New Zealand blackcurrants on the international sports nutrition map for their performance applications, and some high performance nutritionists describing his work as really giving us one of the big breakthroughs of the decade in terms of blackcurrant as being an ergogenic aid for exercise and recovery.
And I think about how supplements are classified, and it's very difficult to get into that class A or category A classification. And up in there, you've got caffeine, creatine, protein powder, sports gels, for example. I wonder how long it will take for blackcurrants to be recognised in relation to those sort of classifications. And I know that none of us have the answer for that, but surely it can't be that far away given how robust the evidence is for it.
Yes, well, no, it's a really good point, because it takes a huge amount of research to establish these interventions on that sports nutrition landscape. And I know certainly in the Australian classification, Mikki, we are in the B category. We started in the C and we've moved up to B. So so the Australian Institute of Sport, have recognised blackcurrants on their register, which is an influential register. So we are getting there, it's great.
Yeah, and that B classification, as I understand it, just means that currently within their schedule of supplements, if you like, there may not be the 15 years of research or 30 years of research that the other products have in order to lift it up a level, but that may well be, and quite likely will be in the future for CurraNZ.
Yeah, look, I like to think so. We work with about 12 universities worldwide, and the interest from academia in researching blackcurrant for its different sports applications is, it's just increasing all the time. And so we're expecting about another 8 or 10 studies to come out in the next 2 years. COVID did slow down and impact on our research program because we couldn't get into the labs, but that's all starting again now, and we've got some really good studies underway. So, there is more to come, and every year I think, this year's going to be an exciting one for the research, and we're 10 years on now from when I started on this path, and there's still a lot more to learn, and it's been a really interesting journey so far.
Oh, that's awesome, Fleur. And particularly as I look at this one study, the exercise-induced muscle damage study in untrained people with regards to resistance training, I mean, the same mechanisms are in play regardless of whether you are doing resistance training or you're doing a long, hard run, that same oxidative damage and muscle damage is being created. So there's certainly application regardless of what sort of exercise or whatnot that people are doing too.
Absolutely. It's it's just not for athletes, it's for anyone really. And actually we did a customer survey earlier in the year, and we found that actually 66% of our regular customers are aged 45 to 65, and they just report that it's great for their mobility, it's great for them to maintain an active lifestyle. And a lot of them are walkers, but also a lot of them are runners and cyclists as well. So I think that's really interesting that actually it's so popular with that 50 plus age group. So it isn't just for the young ambitious athletes, it is for everyone.
Fleur, I've got a question for you actually, which might sound like a bit of a tangent, but has there been any research in the space of the impacts of CurraNZ in the brain, like mental health, oxidative stress, levels of inflammation? I know that they are challenging studies to probably administer or implement, but do we know anything in that space? Because I haven't seen anything actually.
Our research program hasn't focused on cognition or brain health or anything, but Mark Willems is pretty certain that there's another mechanism at place here, and it's our central fatigue perception, which happens in the brain. So now look, in terms of what has been done, there has been a small amount of research has been performed in terms of cognition, where they've tested individuals with a really exhausting battery of tests and really mentally fatiguing tasks. And it has shown that actually when the going gets tough, the blackcurrant does really help with your focus and your attention and your concentration. But when you look at the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory benefits, I think there is a little bit of research that's showing, particularly for aging and that kind of thing, inflammation and oxidative stress are really damaging to your brain cells. And so anything that can protect cells from oxidative stress and the impact of inflammation as we age, which increases, and anything that increases oxygen is going to be good for your general brain health. And I think there has been, certainly in Scotland anyway, there was mouse studies performed with blackcurrant anthocyanins, and it showed that it did help with reducing the amyloid plaques that get laid down with degenerative brain disorders. And it's still really early stage stuff. We can't make any claims around that, but I think generally if you're having a diet that is rich in anti-inflammatory foods and reduce that oxidative stress, then that's going to be benefit for your overall health status and your anti-aging and longevity.
No, I completely agree. And I just think as we were talking about oxidative stress, it just occurred to me that we'd not had that conversation actually, and I'd be super interested in any research that sort of comes out in the area of cognition, of protection, or from neurological disorders and dementia as we age, particularly because we are an aging population. It seems almost like that would be a very not a definitive next step, but it seems like a really obvious place to sort of look if there were
Definitely. And actually thinking about it, Mikki, there was quite recently a Harvard study published, and it was a review of the impact of flavonoids in the diet over a 20-year period. So it was a really serious piece of research, and they published the findings, and they showed if you do have a high level of flavonoids, polyphenols or anthocyanins from your diet, so you have a good selection of your citrus flavonoids, of bioflavonoids that you get from berries, and basically having a lot of vegetables in your diet, that it did make a real impact on reducing age-related degenerative diseases that you get, with cognitive decline. And there was a real association there with improved brain health and function and memory as people aged. And I think from memory that anthocyanins reduce the onset of cognitive decline by about 28% over 20 years. And I think there were other flavonoids and polyphenols that also reduced it, like celery springs to mind, and citrus bioflavonoids reduced it about 32%. And, the interesting thing is the researchers are saying it is more beneficial that if you include these really nutrients, these important nutrients in your diet over the span of your life, but actually it's never too old to start. So even if you are in your 40s and 50s and you start introducing more of these flavonoids in the diet, that it is still going to deliver a benefit and help you as you get older in terms of your brain health and cognition.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And particularly because as someone who is 44 years old, who just started taking CurraNZ last year, the end of last year, I'm glad to hear that it's not too late. And in fact, reminds me of a meme that I have seen. You've got the scale of, you're born, you die, and then someone thinks it's too late, but actually too late is beyond that scale. Once you're dead, that's too late.
Yeah,
but anything up to that, it's never too late.
Absolutely. No, definitely. So it's just, engaging in healthy habits and trying to do it every day, isn't it? Yeah, so Mikki, there's also another study that we published that's probably worth mentioning, and it's kind of relevant for informing our dosing strategies. So it's another project that was published by Professor Willems at the University of Chichester. It was looking at how long you need to take CurraNZ before you start seeing an effect in your blood flow. And it was a follow-on study from one we published in 2017, which was one of our really high-impact pieces of data that showed that taking CurraNZ does increase your blood flow and your main arterial blood flow, which is kind of one of the great things about blackcurrant. We see how impactful it is on improving your cardiovascular output and function. And so this study looked at whether or not anything happened in under 7 days, because, with a lot of our studies, we dose for 7 days and then we test people. But with this one, we tested after day 1 on CurraNZ, day 4 and day 7. And we found that actually there wasn't much of a change after 1 day. So we saw about an 8% improvement in blood flow through the main artery. But actually it was starting to get going at 4 days. There was a 25% improvement, which is still significant. But actually after 7 days, it was more pronounced, and there was a 45% improvement difference in blood flow. So which is a big change. And for a performance perspective, meaningful changes to blood flow are highly relevant. Because if you have enhanced oxygen delivery and clearance of those metabolic waste byproducts, you'll experience less fatigue, better performance, better stamina, and faster recovery. And actually, we got a better finding in this study than the first one, which found 35% improvement to blood flow after a week. And this one was 45%. And it was a really, really good data set as well. I know Mark was really happy with the study and the good data set. We had 19 participants, which for a sports study is actually quite a large cohort. So that just means, look, it helps us inform our dosing strategies. So we're still thinking that the best minimum loading strategy for performance is to take 2 capsules a day for a week leading to the big dance, but you're still going to get improvements if you forget and you take it 4 days leading to an event. But I think outside of that, if you're wanting to improve your training and your recovery consistently, taking at least 1 capsule just every single day and 2 capsules on the days when you're doing really hard training sessions, it will enhance the benefits of exercise that you get. And I think it's nice to touch on a study that we showed that actually it makes exercise easier. So anyone who is trying to get into exercise, doesn't enjoy exercise, finds it really difficult, because blackcurrant increases your blood flow, it reduces your blood pressure, and it makes the act of exertion easier.
Completely.
Yeah, so if you're just taking it every day, you'll get these really good cardiovascular benefits, which just make training just a bit easier and a bit more enjoyable, frankly.
I appreciate that. And it's interesting as well, as you were talking about, that increase in blood flow will get rid of the metabolites, but it will also deliver nutrients more quickly to the muscles as well. So that is the thing that we need to increase our to perform better, is you need that increase of nutrients to the bloodstream. So the fact that CurraNZ works on that level, so a week beforehand, 2 capsules a day before the big dance. I quite like the way that you put that. These are really good practical strategies. So every day, 1 capsule, a big session or key sort of training block, take 2 capsules in the week lead up. As you've sort of got your taper going on, you've got all your bits sort of to organise before you actually do the event, then absolutely write in your diary to start taking 2 capsules in.
That's it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's it. And I think too, if you're doing something like a marathon or a triathlon or whatever the big race is, keep taking the product afterwards as well. We saw in that recovery study, participants took it 4 days after, and you need to keep taking it on board just to coincide with all of those secondary phases of inflammation and oxidative stress. You need to keep it going in there so it can keep working its magic. That's
awesome, Fleur. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it. I know actually that for you, I mean, yes, you're an MIQ but you're still able to do your work there. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me, Fleur. Can you just remind our listeners where they can find more information out and where they can purchase their blackcurrants from?
Yes, certainly. So in New Zealand, the website is CurraNZ.co.nz. In Australia, it's curranz.com.au, and in the UK and for all the Northern Hemisphere, it's curranz.com.
That is awesome, Fleur. Alrighty, you take care and we'll talk soon.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me, Mikki. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I love a good bit of geek out with another sciencey minded person, and you can tell how passionate Fleur is about this product. So I'm really excited to see where CurraNZ is going over the next few months. Next week, I am stoked to be able to bring to you the conversation that I have with Sandy Kneepaver of Higher Running. Sandy is an ultra runner. She is based in the States. She is an advocate for women's sport, and she's full of heart. And we talk all about how she fell into running and just these little sliding door moments for her that got her to where she is today. So I think that you'll really enjoy the conversation. She's amazing, and I love following her YouTube channel and the stuff that her and Sage put out there. Until then though, team, you can catch me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, on Instagram and Twitter at Mikki Williden, or over on my webpage mikkiwilliden.com, where you can sign up to any one of my fat loss programs for men and women, or my real food nutrition program, my athlete program, or my recipe access for $12 a month, where you get access to all of my recipes, a Facebook page, our group forums, member-only Facebook Lives, my weekly emails, and the opportunity to pick my brain about anything nutrition related. Until next week though, you have a great week, and I'll catch you then. See you later.